So it's been a little while since I've spoken about the biggest issue. Just put the volume up. It's been a little while since I've spoken about the biggest issue of this year, which of course is coronavirus. I don't intend this video to be exhaustive. I just want to talk about some basic issues. The Times newspaper always has extensive coverage of developments around the world on this, naturally. I've just read that in Paris, Anne Hidalgo, the mayor, has ordered an on-the-spot fine of €135 for anyone not wearing a mask along the River Seine. I don't know if that's a citywide rule, but it's quite draconian, and that will include up to 6 months in prison if people flout that further. Um, I've just washed my own mask. I have a kind of Velcro nylon type mask I got on eBay. The situation in the UK right now, or England specifically, in Scotland, I think they brought in the rules a bit earlier regarding the face mask specifications, but basically, as it stands in England, you have to wear them in public shops, shopping centres. I'm still seeing people in my local shopping centre not wearing them, but there are people with exemptions, and I understand they have a little card to say this. People, for example, who have breathing problems, pre-existing breathing problems, for example, from asthma, people who maybe would have serious risk of panic attacks, perhaps people who are rape survivors, where that may have been part of their ordeal. Um, I I find myself having quite mixed feelings because I see two potential extremes coming out of this. On one hand, there are some very, very selfish, foolish people who still think the whole thing is fake. They still stubbornly say it's just like seasonal flu, and they're in utter denial that there even is a pandemic. I just find that staggering, and I don't even want to humor their nonsense. I just find that staggering. Um, some of them are motivated by libertarian ideals, some of them motivated by economic concerns. Here's the thing: governments obviously need to balance this out because with an economic recession, you have a lot of problems associated with that as well. Rising crime, mental health problems, even potentially a rise in suicide with people losing jobs and so on. That side of things cannot be underestimated. And whilst I have enormous respect for medical people on the front lines, I feel that some medical commentators are overlooking the mental health side of it, where they're putting the dogma on wearing the mask at all time and that side of things. I mean, I wonder has Anne Hidalgo and the Paris government considered people in that situation, for example, with asthma, who may have a legitimate reason for not wearing the mask. I mean, in Britain, there's been discussion about not stigmatizing those people because there has been some discrimination. Some people who legitimately don't need to wear a mask have been treated as if they're just being selfish and reckless. I think there are some people being selfish and reckless. I mean, here in Sunderland, I've seen some teenagers just basically think that this is all a big laugh. And I actually saw one incident a few weeks ago which really angered me. This kid came into the shop with his bike and he was mouthing off to the assistant. Then he actually coughed at her and he didn't say anything about the virus, but it was clearly deliberate. I was furious. I asked the assistant if it was all right, and she was very almost like she'd got used to it. Um, and there is a lot of people out there, particularly in this country, who are just acting like everything's okay, like they could go to parties and stuff. Here's the thing, particularly in free societies, these circumstances are very alien, even now. People are tired of it. I'm tired of it. Everyone's tired of it. But the big danger is if we all get complacent and then we get a second surge and it's even deadlier than the first. and that could overwhelm health systems. And I don't think that's scaremongering. It happened in 1918. Of course, the difference now is we have the NHS. Our healthcare system's greatly advanced since then. Um, but that is an example of a pandemic where the second phase was a lot deadlier than the first. Um, I do think governments seem to be a little bit careful about how they impose regulations because they need to get a balance between imposing common sense measures, but also not looking like it's sort of opportunistic authoritarianism. I mean, I think the Paris rules seem to me to be draconian. It's justified on the grounds that there's been a rise in cases, but I'm sure France has people in that situation that I named, just as Britain does, just as every country does. People with asthma, people who are rape survivors, people who may have real legitimate reasons for not wearing a mask. So I hope they make exemptions for that. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where people are being put in a no-win position. They're basically being having a choice of holding themselves up in their apartments because they can't wear a mask, and if they go outside not wearing a mask, they'll get fined. So when governments, well, either national governments or local governments, are enforcing these things, they really, really need to think it through on every level. That is one concern I've got. I mean, I don't have those problems, but I have friends who do, and I've huge, huge sympathy for people who feel that they are being stigmatized because of rules. I've no sympathy for selfish idiots who are coming out with conspiracy theories that the whole thing is fake, stuff like that. I don't even want to humor their nonsense. I do think they're very selfish people, and I just find their attitude staggering. But this can't last forever because there's going to be a mental health crisis if there isn't some degree of easing, or at least, I mean, it's a very difficult thing because where you get selfish people who, for example, have large parties and they deliberately flout the rules and so on, they're making it difficult for the rest of us. And governments have to impose the rules with those sort of people. But at the same time, we can't stay in this situation long term. There's absolutely no way that wearing masks can become the norm in our societies. I know that for a long time, wearing masks is quite common in Asian cities. Long before coronavirus, you would see on the streets of Beijing or Shanghai or Jakarta people wearing masks because of the high pollution in those cities. Um, but there's other restrictions I think that really do have to be temporary. Otherwise, naturally, people are going to start thinking that, they're going to start endorsing those conspiracy theories that it's a pathway to some sort of authoritarianism. I don't believe it is because I don't see what governments would gain from it. They're under enormous pressure. They don't want their economies to be facing recession, which is already happening. They wouldn't gain politically from that, but this is something that is, come onto the world. I do think the Chinese government's a lot to answer for hiding data from the World Health Organization. But and I do think there should be a lot of pressure against China for their dishonesty, the Chinese government. But I also think that government should also be judged on their own response to this. And I do think the Johnson administration hasn't been entirely clear in its guidelines. The Cummings scandal didn't help things, but it's not just the double standards of that. There's unquestionably been mixed messages coming out from government. It's just being very woolly in terms of what exactly is allowed, what isn't. I think that's problematic. And in other countries, when you have the likes of Bolsonaro in Brazil and Trump in the United States outright, in the early days especially denying it, it's just reckless in the extreme. So whilst I do think the Chinese regime can be blamed for a lot, I wouldn't blame them for every single death in the world. I think that would be pushing it. I have contempt for the Chinese government, but I'm also a realist, and I think that there will be some things that governments have done wrong whereby they can be blamed domestically. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But I really think that when local and national governments impose these sort of things, I mean, that's pretty draconian. €135 on the spot and up to 6 months in prison. It's pretty draconian. Now, I know the counter argument is, well, this pandemic's killing people and not standing by the rules spreads a virus that can kill. So it's almost tantamount to manslaughter if you're willfully flouting the rules. But like I say, there are people who really do have legitimate excuses, and I really hope the Paris government considers that because otherwise it's just putting those people in an awful position. Okay, let me know your thoughts, and let me know where you are in the world. What's the local situation where you are? Do you feel your government handled it well? Do you feel your country's handled it well, your city? Let me know the situation where you are.